Story 1. When I first met her, she seemed so normal, more than normal even. Amelia was captivating. We met online, where conversations were easy, and everything felt safe. I'd been single for a while, and I was ready to meet someone new. She was witty, intelligent, and had this slightly sarcastic sense of humor that drew me in. After a few weeks of messaging, we decided to meet in person. We met at a small cafe in the city. The kind of place with low lighting and cozy booths where you could talk for hours without realizing how much time had passed. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately. Her pictures hadn't done her justice. Her long dark hair framed her pale face perfectly, and her green eyes seemed to glint with some hidden knowledge. She was wearing a simple black dress that clung to her in all the right places. "Jason?" she asked with a slight smile as she approached the table. "Yes, Amelia?" I stood up, extending my hand. She took it and shook it lightly. Her skin was cold to the touch, sending a small shiver down my spine. "It's great to finally meet you," she said as she sat down. The conversation flowed as easily in person as it had online. We talked about everything: work, life, past relationships. She was candid about her last relationship, a guy who had apparently become too possessive. I laughed and said I hoped I wouldn't be the next in line. She smiled at that, but there was something in her eyes just for a moment that seemed off. "Oh, Jason," she said softly, "you have nothing to worry about." The evening went well, and as we parted ways, we agreed to meet again soon. As I watched her walk away into the night, I felt a strange mixture of excitement and unease. I chalked it up to first date nerves. But that was before things started to get weird. It began with the texts. At first, it was nothing unusual, just a good morning or "how was your day?" But soon, they became more frequent. And more personal. "Are you home now?" she'd ask. "Yeah, just got back." "Why?" "Just wondering." "Thought about you," she'd reply. Or, "Saw you leave this morning. You look good in that blue shirt." I hadn't told her where I lived. My apartment wasn't exactly easy to find, tucked away in a quiet part of town. At first, I thought maybe she had guessed it from some of the things I'd mentioned, but then I started noticing her car, a black sedan, parked a block away from my place. "Amelia, have you been driving by my place?" I asked her one evening over the phone, trying to keep my tone light. There was a pause on the other end before she laughed. "Oh, Jason, you're so paranoid." "No, I just happen to be in the area sometimes. It's a small city, you know." I wanted to believe her, so I let it go. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. One night, I was coming home late from work. The street was quiet, and the air was cold. As I approached my building, I saw a figure standing in the shadows near the entrance. My heart skipped a beat, but when I got closer, I saw it was Amelia. "Amelia? What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to mask the alarm in my voice. "I was just in the neighborhood," she said, stepping out of the shadows. "I thought I'd surprise you." "You did," I replied, trying to laugh it off. "But it's late. You should have called." "I wanted it to be a surprise," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. We stood there for a moment, the silence between us heavy. I invited her in, more out of a sense of obligation than anything else. Once inside, she seemed more at ease. She made herself comfortable on my couch, and I offered her a drink, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As the night went on, she asked me more and more personal questions. "Do you ever feel like someone's watching you, Jason?" she asked, her voice low. "Sometimes," I admitted, trying to sound casual. "Why?" She smiled, a slow, unsettling smile. I think everyone feels that way sometimes. When she finally left that night, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But that relief was short-lived. The next morning, I found a note on my kitchen counter. I hadn't seen her put it there, but the handwriting was unmistakable. "I'm always with you, Jason." Panic surged through me. How had she gotten in? I was sure I'd locked the door after she left. I texted her, trying to keep my tone calm. "Hey, did you leave a note here last night?" Her reply was almost immediate. "Yes. I thought you'd like it." I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. Instead, I spent the day at work in a haze, distracted and on edge. That night, I made sure all the doors and windows were locked. I even checked twice before going to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, set my nerves on edge. At some point, I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of my phone buzzing. Groggily, I reached for it and saw a message from Amelia. It was a video. I hesitated before opening it, my stomach twisted with dread. The video was dark and grainy, but as it played, my blood ran cold. It was me, sleeping. The camera hovered above me, capturing every breath, every movement. I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked around the room, but everything was as it should be. The door was still closed, the windows shut tight. I called her, my hands shaking. "Amelia, what the hell is this?" She didn't answer at first, and for a moment, I thought she wasn't going to. But then I heard her soft laugh on the other end. "I told you, Jason. I'm always with you." I hung up, my mind racing. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't keep living like this. I decided to change the locks, maybe even move, but I didn't have the money for that right now. For the next few days, I barely slept. I kept my phone off, blocked her number, and tried to pretend everything was normal. But she wasn't done with me. One evening, I came home to find my apartment in disarray. Drawers were pulled out, clothes thrown everywhere. But nothing was missing. I was about to call the police when I saw it, a note on my pillow. "You can't hide from me, Jason." That was the last straw. I packed a bag and left that night. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there any longer. I drove for hours, ending up at a small motel on the outskirts of the city. I paid in cash, checked in under a fake name, and locked myself in the room. I spent the night staring at the door, waiting for it to open, waiting for her to find me. But she never did. The next morning, I decided to go to the police. I couldn't prove anything. There was no sign of forced entry, and all the messages had been deleted when I turned my phone back on. But I had to try. When I arrived at the station, I was met with polite indifference. "We'll look into it," the officer said, but I could tell he didn't believe me. I left feeling defeated, unsure of what to do next. I couldn't go back to my apartment, but I couldn't stay in hiding forever. That night, as I lay in the unfamiliar motel bed, I heard a soft knock on the door. My blood ran cold. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knock came again, louder this time. "Jason," her voice called out from the other side. "You can't hide from me." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just lay there, hoping she would go away. But she didn't. The door creaked open slowly, and there she was, standing in the doorway, her eyes glinting in the darkness. "I told you," she whispered, stepping into the room. "I'm always with you." And as she approached, I knew there was no escaping her. Not now, not ever.
Story 2. I wasn't sure why I noticed him that day. Maybe it was the way the sunlight hit his face, casting deep shadows under his eyes, or maybe it was the odd stillness in his posture. Whatever it was, I saw him sitting on the corner of Main and 5th, just outside the bakery I visit every morning. His clothes were tattered, a mismatched ensemble of dirty layers, and his hands were wrapped around a paper cup that he held out toward the passing crowd. "Spare some change," he muttered as I walked by, not even looking up. I hesitated for a second, my hand instinctively reaching for my purse, but I stopped myself. I had been doing this more often lately, trying to hold on to what little I had. Life wasn't exactly easy, and charity was a luxury I couldn't always afford. I quickened my pace, trying to shake off the unease that settled in my chest as I passed him. "Maybe tomorrow," I whispered to myself as if that made it better. But tomorrow came, and he was there again. Same spot, same posture, same muttered plea for change. This time, I didn't even slow down. I just kept walking, feeling his gaze follow me as I entered the bakery. I told myself it was nothing. There were beggars everywhere in the city. This was just one of the unfortunate souls who happened to be in my path. I couldn't help everyone. Later that day, I went to the supermarket. As I pushed my cart down the aisles, selecting vegetables and milk, I caught a glimpse of him out of the corner of my eye. He was standing near the entrance, his back hunched as if he were waiting for someone. For a moment I froze, gripping the handle of my cart, my mind racing. Was it really him? Or was I just imagining things? I shook my head, forcing a laugh. "Get a grip, Julia," I muttered under my breath. "It's just a coincidence." But when I left the store, bags in hand, there he was, sitting on the bench across the street. His eyes were fixed on me, and this time, there was no mistaking it. I could feel his gaze burning into my back as I hurried to my car, my heart pounding. I told myself it was just paranoia. This was a big city, after all. It wasn't unusual to see the same person in different places. The next day, I saw him again. This time, he was outside the pharmacy where I stopped to pick up a prescription. He didn't say anything as I walked by, just watched me with those hollow eyes. My skin prickled with unease, but I forced myself to ignore it. I told myself he wasn't following me, that it was all in my head. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. That evening, I sat in my apartment, the unease from the day still gnawing at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the building, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump. I double-checked the locks on my doors and windows, feeling foolish for being so paranoid. "This is ridiculous," I said out loud, trying to convince myself. "He's just a homeless man. He's not stalking you." But the next morning, as I left for work, he was there again, standing at the corner near my building. My heart sank as I realized this wasn't just a coincidence anymore. He was following me. Everywhere I went, he was there, silent, watching, waiting. By the end of the week, I was a nervous wreck. I saw him everywhere. At the cafe where I grabbed my morning coffee, outside the office when I left for lunch, even at the gym when I went for a run to clear my head. He never approached me, never said a word, but his presence was suffocating. I couldn't escape him. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself I was overreacting. But it was no use. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't sleep at night. All I could think about was him, his hollow eyes, the way he seemed to materialize wherever I went, as if he were haunting me. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront him. Maybe if I gave him the money, he would leave me alone. Maybe that was all he wanted. It was a Saturday morning when I saw him again, sitting on that same corner where I'd first noticed him. My hands trembled as I approached, my heart racing. I reached into my purse and pulled out a $20 bill, holding it out to him. "Here," I said, my voice shaking. "Take it. Just please leave me alone." He looked up at me then, his eyes dark and unreadable. For a moment, he just stared at the money in my hand, and I thought maybe he hadn't heard me. But then slowly he reached out and took the bill from my hand. Relief washed over me, and I started to turn away, ready to put this nightmare behind me. But then I heard it, the sound of paper crumpling. I turned back to see him holding the $20 bill, his eyes locked onto mine with a cold intensity that made my blood run cold. Without breaking eye contact, he crumpled the bill in his fist and threw it to the ground. What are you doing?" I stammered, confusion and fear swirling inside me. "Why did you do that?" He didn't answer. He just stood up, his movements slow and deliberate, and stepped closer to me. I could smell the stench of the street on him, a rancid mix of sweat and decay. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs were frozen in place. "You think money can fix this?" His voice was low, almost a growl, and it sent a shiver down my spine. "You think you can pay me to go away?" I don't understand," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He took another step toward me, and I could see the fury in his eyes now, a wild, uncontrolled rage that made my breath catch in my throat. "You ignored me. You walked past me like I was nothing. And now you think a few dollars can make it right?" "I'm sorry," I blurted out, my voice trembling. "I didn't mean to." "Sorry," he spat the word, his face twisting in anger. "You're sorry now? Now that you can't escape me?" I tried to back away, but he grabbed my wrist with a grip like iron, pulling me close. "You've seen me, haven't you? Everywhere you go. I'm always there. Watching." My heart pounded in my chest, fear clawing at my insides. "Please," I begged, tears welling up in my eyes. "Please just let me go." He smiled then, a chilling, hollow smile that made my blood run cold. "It's too late for that, Julia. You can't just walk away from this. You can't walk away from me." I struggled to pull away, but his grip tightened. "What do you want from me?" I cried, desperation creeping into my voice. He leaned in closer, his breath hot against my ear. "I want you to see," he whispered. "I want you to understand what it's like to be invisible. To be nothing." I shook my head, trying to make sense of his words. "I don't understand." "You will," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "You'll see me, Julia. Every day, every night. Wherever you go, I'll be there. And you'll know what it's like to live in fear." With that, he released me, shoving me backward. I stumbled and fell to the ground, my pulse racing as I scrambled to my feet. He stood there, watching me with those cold, empty eyes as I backed away. "Remember, Julia?" he called after me as I turned and ran, his voice echoing in my ears. "I'll always be watching." I didn't stop running until I was safely inside my apartment, the door locked and bolted behind me. My chest heaved with each breath, my mind spinning with terror. I wanted to believe it was over, that I was safe now. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The days that followed were a blur of fear and paranoia. Every time I stepped outside, I expected to see him. And I did. Sometimes he was close by, sometimes just a distant figure in the crowd, but he was always there. Watching. I tried to ignore him, tried to live my life as if he wasn't there, but it was impossible. The fear gnawed at me constantly, making it hard to think, hard to breathe. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I became a prisoner in my own mind, haunted by the shadow of the man I had ignored.
Story 3. I never thought I'd be that guy. You know the type, the obsessed ex, the one who can't let go, who turns into a shadow lurking in the corners of his former lover's life. But here I am, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, trying to recognize the person I've become. It all started after Sarah broke up with me. We'd been together for 3 years, 3 perfect years, at least I thought they were perfect. But then, out of nowhere, she said she needed space, needed time to figure out who she was without me. I didn't understand it. I still don't. James, it's not you, she had said, her voice trembling. I just need to be on my own for a while. I need to find myself. Her words felt like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. Find yourself. I spat back, my voice barely controlled. You're right here, Sarah. You're right fucking here. She looked at me with those big tear-filled eyes, and I knew it was over. But I couldn't accept it. I couldn't accept that she was willing to throw away everything we had built together. So I did what any desperate man would do. I tried to win her back. At first, it was just little things. I'd send her flowers, leave her notes, text her constantly. I told myself it was just love, just a way to remind her of what we had. But she didn't see it that way. She stopped responding to my messages, stopped answering my calls. She shut me out completely. It drove me crazy. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. All I could think about was her, about how she had been mine and how she had just walked away. I needed to know what she was doing, who she was with. I needed to know if she was thinking about me as much as I was thinking about her. So I started following her. I know how that sounds, but it wasn't like that at first. I just wanted to know if she was okay. I'd park outside her apartment, watch the lights in her windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. Sometimes I'd see her leave, heading out with friends or going to work. Other times, I'd see her with someone else. The first time I saw her with another guy, something snapped inside me. I was parked across the street from her apartment, hidden in the shadows, when she came out with him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with that stupid confident smile plastered across his face. She was laughing, her arm looped through his, looking happier than I'd seen her in weeks. Rage bubbled up inside me, hot and consuming. How could she do this? How could she move on so quickly, as if I had never mattered? I followed them that night, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. They went to a bar, laughing and drinking, oblivious to the world around them. Oblivious to me. I watched them for hours, my heart pounding with a mix of jealousy and hatred. When they finally left, I followed them back to his place. They were all over each other, kissing and laughing like I had never existed. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in my car, staring at the windows of his apartment, replaying the scenes of them together over and over in my mind. By morning I was a wreck, but I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't let her go. I couldn't let her be with someone else. The first kill was an accident. I hadn't planned on doing anything that night. I just wanted to scare him, to show him that she wasn't his to have. But when I saw them together, saw the way he touched her, something inside me snapped. I followed him when he left her place, waited until he was alone. I didn't know what I was doing. My mind was a fog of anger and pain. He never saw me coming. One minute he was walking down the quiet street, the next he was on the ground, my hands around his throat. I don't remember much of it, just the way his eyes bulged, the way he clawed at my hands, the sound of his last gurgling breath. When it was over, I just stood there, staring at what I had done. The fear should have set in then, the guilt, the realization of what I had become. But it didn't. Instead, I felt relief. Relief that he was gone, that he couldn't have her, that she was still mine, even if she didn't know it. I watched the news the next day, waiting for the story to break. They found his body in the alley where I left him, but there was nothing to connect him to me. I was careful. I was always careful. But Sarah, she didn't stop seeing other men. The second one was easier. I followed him home from their date, waited until he was alone. This time I brought a knife. It was quick, almost too quick. The rush of adrenaline, the feeling of control, it was intoxicating. He didn't even have time to scream. After that, I knew there was no going back. I had crossed a line, but I didn't care. All I cared about was Sarah, about keeping her safe from these men who didn't deserve her, who couldn't love her like I did. The third one put up a fight. He was bigger than the others, stronger. But I was faster, more determined. I cornered him in a parking garage, and it was over before he even knew what was happening. His blood was warm on my hands, and for a moment, I felt like I was drowning in it. But then it was done, and he was just another obstacle removed from my path. I started to feel invincible. As long as I was careful, as long as I stayed in the shadows, I could protect her from anyone. I followed her everywhere, watched her every move. I knew when she was happy, when she was sad, when she missed me, because I knew she did, even if she wouldn't admit it. But then she met someone new. Someone different. Someone I couldn't just scare away. His name was Mark, and he was persistent. No matter how much I watched, how much I followed, he kept coming back. He was charming, good-looking, successful. Everything I wasn't. And worst of all, he made her happy. I could see it in her eyes, the way she smiled when she was with him. It made me sick. I couldn't let him take her from me. I planned it carefully, watching his routines, learning his habits. But the more I watched, the more I realized he wasn't like the others. He wasn't just some fling or rebound. He was serious about her. And she was falling for him. The thought of losing her drove me to the edge. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. All I could think about was Mark and how he was taking her from me. I had to do something. I had to stop him. The night I decided to act, I was more nervous than I'd ever been. This wasn't just another kill. This was the man who was going to take her from me, forever. I couldn't let that happen. I followed him to his apartment, waited until he was alone. But as I approached, knife in hand, something stopped me. I don't know what it was, a sound, a feeling, but suddenly I knew something was wrong. I turned to see Sarah standing there, her eyes wide with horror as she looked at the knife in my hand, at the man she loved. "James," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just stared at her, at the woman I had done all this for, the woman I had killed for. And in that moment, I realized how far I had fallen. I was just trying to protect you, I stammered, dropping the knife. I couldn't let them take you from me. "James, you're sick," she said, her voice shaking with fear. "You need help." I tried to reach for her to explain, but she backed away, tears streaming down her face. "Stay away from me," she screamed, before running to Mark, who held her close, shielding her from me. I stood there, frozen, as the reality of what I had done came crashing down around me. The woman I loved, the woman I had killed for, looked at me like I was a monster. And I realized that's exactly what I had become. The sound of sirens in the distance snapped me out of my daze. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get away. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape the truth. I was the villain in my own story, and there was no redemption for someone like me.